All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the study session of the Historic Preservation Board. And let's see, Andrea has sent out the packet for us, and as usual, we have a pretty packed agenda. So why don't we just go ahead and jump right into it? Andrea, would you like to take it from here?
Yes, thank you. So tonight we have two items on the main agenda. And the first one is going to be something that we've been waiting for a long time, on a topic that I think is really important for all of us to have a good grasp of, and that is historic significance and integrity. And in order for a landmark to be property to be eligible for landmark designation, a property really ought to have both significance and integrity. Currently, our code doesn't require that. And Littleton has gotten comments over the years from the state that, when are you going to put that in your code? Mm-hmm. So now we have the opportunity to do it. And because these concepts take a little while to understand and work through examples, we have a presentation. And Chris Geddes has offered to do that presentation. And she is well-versed in both of these concepts. And so really looking forward to it. And following the presentation, hope that we can have some discussion on it. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris to share her screen.
So this is a presentation that I did not create it, and I have to give credit to my late boss, who was the National and State Register Coordinator, Dale Heckendorn, and Rick knew Dale, and he kind of created this really easy to understand and kind of entertaining presentation, a PowerPoint presentation on significance and integrity. And so I'm going to go through that. I've tweaked it a little bit. And then at the end, we have a couple of pictures of Littleton buildings that we're hoping will generate some discussion. And I think Andrea might have some questions that go along with it to kind of get us all talking about how the significance and integrity will play out in Littleton. So keep in mind, when this presentation was created, it was for National and State Register focus, but it absolutely positively applies to local landmarking as well. So let's see here. All right. Okay, so significance and integrity. Okay. So, we're going to start off with kind of a definition of historic preservation. And in this endeavor that we call historic preservation, there are no more important concepts than those of significance and integrity. And so, here's kind of a basic definition of historic preservation. This actually came from one of the statewide preservation plans, and it's the stewardship of the important places from our past, including buildings, structures, sites, districts, and landscapes. It's not just the built environment, but it's also other components of that built environment. So these are the most important concepts in historic preservation. And when it comes to historic preservation, we have very specific definitions for these terms. 3 elements of the definition are particularly worth noting: the idea of importance, the emphasis on places, and the collection of things which preservationists seek to preserve: buildings, structures, sites, districts, and landscapes. The museum is a close relative of historic preservation. There are many ways to do history. Museum is one way, historic preservation another, while books, films, and oral interpretation are still others. One way is not better than the other. Each method has its advantages and disadvantages. All the methods seek to keep us connected to our past and to understand that past and its relationship to the present and the future. However, it is important that we know the differences between various means of doing history so we can pick the methods that will work best in any given situation. Both the museum and historic preservation are based on the concept of telling history through three-dimensional objects. The object allows the viewer to see something actually associated with the history being told. In the case of the museum, the objects or artifacts are moved to the museum where they are protected, studied, and interpreted. In the case of historic preservation, we tell the story through big artifacts of the size that generally one cannot move to a museum. In fact, one of the primary goals of historic preservation is not to move buildings and structures because much of their significance is based on their association with the place in which they functioned. Historic preservation also differs from the museum in that we seek to keep the resource in use, preferably the original use. But if that is not possible, then in an appropriate adaptive reuse, which preserves the integrity of the resource. In the museum, the artifact is used for study and interpretation, but it no longer functions as originally designed. In the case of the previous museum exhibit, the curator does not go into the museum after work and drive the automobile home. In historic preservation, we are looking for places that can tell their story. And so we come to this is like the classic slide that everybody remembers from this presentation. In the field of historic preservation, we are looking for properties that have both significance and integrity. We might think of these two criteria as columns supporting the concept of eligibility. Eligibility for local landmarking, eligibility for National Register, or even for historic preservation. The beam of eligibility rests on top of the two columns of significance and integrity. It is not nailed to the column tops. It is not like a cartoon where the columns can be knocked out while the beam floats magically in midair. The columns must remain in place to support eligibility. One of the columns may be weaker than the other. Significance may be strong, but the physical integrity of the resource is weak. Or integrity may be strong while the significance is weak. Of course, both significance and integrity could be weak. Whatever the mix, the weakest column must be strong enough to support its half of the load, or eligibility collapses. In many cases, we will look at properties that have an important history, but have undergone major change since the time they achieved their significance. The change may be so great that the integrity has been lost. In such a case, we have to inform the property owner that despite the historical significance of the property, it has lost too much physical integrity to be eligible for listing. Many times, property owners will go and do additional research on their property to reinforce its significance. However, that is not what caused it to lose eligibility. It was the loss of integrity. Making the standing column stronger will not resurrect the collapsed column. Sometimes property owners may think that we don't value the history of their property. This is not the case. Historic preservation is looking for properties with both significance and integrity. The history of the property is not lost if it is not eligible for the National or State Register. Maybe local landmark would be a better approach, or the history may be preserved in a book or a brochure or as part of some other means, a walking tour perhaps. Sometimes we hear the expression that significance mitigates integrity. In other words, there are some properties that are just so important that even if they lost their physical integrity, they are still eligible for historic designation. Based on our model for evaluation, that is not the case. Any property, regardless of its significance, must retain sufficient integrity to convey its significance, or it is not eligible for historic designation. So how do we evaluate properties for significance and integrity? What we can say for certain is that significance and integrity is not a chicken or egg kind of controversy. Significance always comes first. We cannot evaluate the integrity without first establishing a property's significance. We want to be as specific as possible when defining significance. The National Register program established a list of areas of significance in order to help people focus on just how a particular property may be significant. Significance is the what of the story the property can tell. Most properties are significant in more than one area. For instance, a school building may be significant both in the areas of education and architecture. A factory may be eligible in the areas of industry and engineering. And I think a lot of these areas, most local communities just use the same areas when evaluating their properties. The period of significance defines the when of the story. When did the property achieve its significance? We want to be as specific as possible when defining the period of significance. The period may be a range. For instance, a school building may be significant for its association with local education during the period 1875 to 1890. In the case of architecture, a building's period of significance would be 1 year, the year the building was constructed or first occupied. A resource could have more than one period of significance. The important thing to remember is that the period of significance relates directly to the significance of the property. Which brings us to the concept of integrity. This is sort of the where of historic preservation. Perhaps it would be better to say that the integrity describes the where and its relationship to the what. Many times we hear an expression that a property retains sufficient integrity to convey its significance. Visually, we might think of integrity as a bridge spanning a canyon. On one side of the canyon is the historic resource. On the other side is the viewer. We want to convey the significance of the property to the viewer. We package the significance in some way, like a National Register nomination, a local landmark application, or maybe a section in a walking tour. Then we want to convey that information to the viewer. In this illustration here, we packed the significance into a truck, and we are trying to drive it across the canyon to the viewer. Integrity acts as the bridge. Properties with a high degree of integrity can convey their significance. Properties with a low level of significance cannot. Sometimes integrity seems obvious. When we look at this bridge in the early evening, we can be very tempted to say, wow, clearly this bridge has a lot of integrity. But we really cannot say that without knowing the significance of the bridge. It might have integrity, and it might not. So how do we go about assessing integrity? Just as in the case of significance, where we divided it into areas of significance and periods of significance, we can also divide integrity into pieces. And this is most often done by using the 7 aspects of integrity. These were set up by the National Park Service. So they're in the bulletins that assist people in completing National Register nominations. And this is something that we are looking at wanting to add to our criteria. So this is really important to understand. These 7 aspects can kind of be sorted into logical groupings, as you can see here. Location and setting are closely related, though they are different. Location refers to the physical place of the resource in relationship to its significance. Is this the place where the property gained its significance? Setting relates to the condition of the property's location. How have the surroundings changed since the property gained its significance? Design, materials, and workmanship are the heart of architecture and engineering. Feeling is the hardest to define and has a lot to do with the emotional response a property evokes in a viewer. Association refers to the connection between the property and the claim to significance. How closely is that property associated with the significance? Every property will have some mix of these 7 aspects. The question becomes one of determining which aspects and at what amount will be necessary for a property to convey its significance. And it's going to be different for each property. And you don't have to have all 7 present for a property to be eligible. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples here that will kind of walk you through how we would apply these aspects of integrity. So this is a rural school. It's in Gunnison County. It's the Spencer School. It's significant for education. Period of significance being 1902 to 1946. That's when it operated as a school. It's also significant under architecture. It's a classic one-room schoolhouse. The period of significance for architecture is 1902, the year in which it was constructed. And all 7 aspects of integrity are present here. It still feels like a rural school. It's in its original location. It has the original outbuildings. You stand here and you kind of feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. All of those aspects are present. Now we have the Cherry Creek School. And this is in Arapahoe County. So this one is significant for education, period of 1874 to 1951, when it was active as a school. Also significant under architecture, period of significance of 1874, when it was constructed. But this building has been moved to an urban location. And obviously you can see it doesn't have the same feel that the Spencer School had. The aspect of location has been lost. Lost too is the aspect of setting. Design, materials, and workmanship appear to remain for the surviving buildings. But did all of the buildings survive? Did the original site contain a teacherage, a barn, or an additional privy like the previous school? Feeling has been compromised by the loss of location and setting, and perhaps by the loss of associated buildings. As for association, this is the building, but it is not the place. This building is listed on the National Register. It's on the campus of Cherry Creek High School. It used to be located where Cherry Creek Reservoir is. And when the reservoir, when they started planning for the reservoir, they ended up deciding to preserve it, but it involved moving it in order to do that. You know, you can go inside, it still feels like a one-room schoolhouse. On the interior, it's set up that way, desks, all of that kind of stuff. But on the exterior, we have the loss of setting and location, and feeling has been compromised. And then we have the Coates Creek School in Mesa County. And this is also significant for education. Period of significance is 1919 to 1942. Also significant for architecture. The period of significance of 1919 for the date of construction. When we go to assess the integrity on this one, we should note that this building was moved 1.5 miles in 1926. So the questions that come up, can it convey its significance for the entire 1919 to 1942 period, or only for the 1926 to 1942 period? How was the building moved? Was it picked up and transported as a unit, carefully taken apart and reassembled in the new location exactly as it had been originally constructed? Or was the school just built anew using only the original materials, but not the original design? So those are all questions that feed into, you know, how do you assess integrity? We know it's significant for education, but how do we assess the integrity related to that? This one is listed on the National Register as well. Last example, this is the Colorado National Bank in downtown Denver. Significant for commerce and economics, with a period of significance of 1915 to 2003. Significant for architecture, for classical revival. Period of significance for that would be 1915 for the original data construction. Significant for work of a master in 1915. Significant for its association with the Colorado Yule Marble Company. Again, 1915, all tied to the data construction. This is an evolving building that has really changed a lot over time. So this is what it looked like originally in 1915. It was built as a bank and used as one until 1926. So, we have commerce and economics that would have a period of significance of 1915 to 1926. We have architectural significance for classical revival style, 1915. It's also the work of a master. It was Fisher and Fisher who designed this building. They were prominent Denver architects, did a ton of residences, as well as a lot of commercial buildings and governmental buildings in Denver. And then, like I said, the Colorado Yule Marble Association. If the importance is the original construction and the early history, does the building retain sufficient integrity to convey the significance with its current appearance? So keep in mind, this is what it looks like now. Next up, it was also, it continued to be a bank from 1926 to 1964. So, we have commerce and economics as a period of significance. Is it 1915 to 1964? Is it 1926 to 1964? We still have the classical revival architecture. So would we do 1915 or 1915 and 1926 because the building was doubled in size? This is also the work of a master because in addition to Fisher and Fisher doing the original building, the addition was constructed by designed by Merrill Hoyt, who is also a prominent Denver architect. So we could have two periods of significance related to the two different masters. And he also used Colorado Yule Marble. And he obviously duplicated the original so that it looks seamless for the addition. Now we have another addition. So, we have commerce and economics, we kind of have all these different periods of significance. We could have 1915 to 2003. We could have 1926 to 2003, I think that's when it stopped being a bank. 1964, 2003, because we have this upper level addition that occurred in 1964. And it was a modern or modernist interpretation of classical revival. We have, and it's again, so we're still looking at classical revival. So we have 1915, we have 1926, and now we have 1964 as a significant date. Fisher and Fisher did the original portion. We had Merrill Hoyt do the addition on the main level. Then we have Rogers and Nagel, who did the upper level addition, and they were also well-known architects in the 1960s, so they are significant works, work of masters. They also use, they did not use Colorado Yule Marble. And then if you can see behind it, this large tower, in 1975, the tower building was designed by Minoru Yamasaki. He was the designer of the New York World Trade Center towers. And the tower's original marble cladding was reclad with granite. So then we have that additional layer of history with another, master architect. In doing, just checking a few things out with this building, I discovered that the bank that owned it in the early 2000s, when they closed it, there was a struggle to find out what to do with this building, and it's such an important building in downtown Denver. And it was bought out by a hotel chain, and I want to say it was the Marriott. And they added a 2-story setback addition on top of the 1964 edition. So it's got about 6 stories now. And it was done with federal tax credits. So it was something that they went through a process and had it reviewed to make sure it met the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation and adaptive reuse. And they received federal tax credits for it. So there's yet another layer of history that, I didn't even have a picture for to be able to include that. But it's just kind of a reminder that history is just one layer on top of the others. And so this is a way to show you that, we can have additions to buildings, and we can have changes to buildings that are significant in their own right. Doesn't automatically discount a building from being eligible. And so, in the field of historic preservation, we are always looking for properties that have both significance and integrity. We might think of these 2 criteria as those columns supporting the concept of eligibility. That, column, that eligibility beam is not nailed down. And so we have to have both significance and integrity to have an eligible resource. But we always have to start with significance in order to be able to assess the integrity. And so we have some pictures here. The Green Bride is certainly one that we could talk about. It's an 1890s building, and then it has a 1950s storefront change. And if I remember Rick telling me correctly, this is kind of our last 1950s facade on the downtown commercial buildings. A lot of the buildings that had this 1950s look on it with the glass plates and the storefront windows and those metal storefront windows and the sometimes the awnings above and how the signage was done. Those have all kind of been restored back to their original look. And so this is kind of all we have of that 1950s period. So this is one that we should talk about. And then we have the View House. And, then and now picture where we can certainly see, the stepped parapet is intact. The openings are still there, whether it's the storefront windows or the vehicular entrance. And yet here we have a case of that upper floor setback addition. So, Andrea, did you have questions to kind of start the discussion?
Andrea, you're muted. Still muted, Andrea.
Still muted.
We can't hear you, Andrea. Oh, there you go.
Okay, got it. Sorry. Can you hear me now? Okay, so when I look at the Green Bride, the one up on the screen here, the first thing that comes to my mind is the setting. Now, most likely this building was, placed between 2 other adjacent adjoining buildings on historic Main Street. But now what we have is something clearly of a different era and not yet historic. It may become historic at some point. Maybe it'll be contributing or non-contributing. I guess we don't know yet. But to me, that's something that is kind of a topic for discussion. And I'd be curious to hear how board members view the setting of this building.
I mean, I'll pipe in if nobody else is going to say anything. I mean, for me, so, if we're looking at like the aspects of integrity, like I just talked about, it's in its original location. But certainly the setting has been impacted because of the buildings on either side of it, which are from the late 1990s, early 1990s?
Late 1990s.
So, it certainly has an out of place feeling wedged in between those two. But that's, that's the original building to me. And so, from my perspective, if we were looking at, a district, to me, this clearly would be a contributing building, because my opinion of it would be significant for commerce. It would be significant for architecture. And I think it would be the original date of construction, and then whatever time period, let's just, say 1952, just for random, to pick a date. So 1952, when they did the mid-century kind of storefront change, that was very typical of that era to kind of modernize the building. So we would have, 2 periods of significance for architecture. Then we would have a period of significance for commerce, which would be a range. And, whatever the date of construction is, 1890, say, to, whatever we decide is the ending date for commerce. So we have those two things going on. It's significant for that. The building clearly ties into that. It has vestiges of both of those time periods. It's been continuously used in a commercial aspect. It's in the original location. It has the original materials, design, workmanship. I mean, the only thing that is askew here is setting, because of the two newer buildings.
But
That's worth.
I'd also like to throw in, the setting is certainly off. There's no question about that. But that is the original setting, as Chris pointed out. The setting has changed around it. It was not moved. And secondly, I think you have significance in the 2 periods when it was constructed. And then I think that facade renovation is probably earlier than 1950s. I bet 1940s on that. And it tells a story that that tells a story about Littleton, but also about urban downtowns in general. That they were seen as, the old 19th century storefronts were seen as dated and tired, and they zipped it up and modernized it and made it more relevant for that time. I think it also has great significance because of materials. The black is the vitrolite, and vitrolite is it was a very common, and it was a great product at the time, and it came in all different colors. And now it is extremely difficult. It's difficult to find. I think if you were tasked with replacing vitrolite, that's really tough to try to source that stuff these days. So I think I would vote for significance on materials for the vitrolite. And that's the only vitrolite in downtown Littleton.
Yes. So what happens if the property owner would like to make changes to the storefront? what really are their options? Can they go back to the original look? Or is what we have significant? And then the next question is, what do they do about the vitrolite, the glass there, if that product can't be found?
I would argue that 1940s, 50s storefront is extremely significant. And, like Rick said, it's the last one existing in downtown. So many others have removed that to go back to the, the earlier time period. And so, this is kind of our one shining example. It increases the significance of it. And so I would really, want to steer them towards keeping this and looking for ways to help them. If they had a cracked vitrolite panel, that we would, assist them with trying to locate, replacing it in kind, talking about the tax credits and things like that they could use to offset maintaining that facade.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, you're looking at, if you were to change that facade and take it back to an old-timey look, you would lose authenticity also, because you wouldn't be able to take it back to what it was originally constructed. And vitrolite is very hard to source, but it can be sourced. It's not like it's an extinct thing. Yes, Rick?
So I have a couple things here. One, I would argue that the setting is intact. It's just not intact from this picture. If you were to stand at that building and look across the street, all the buildings within this period exists when you're looking at it from across the street. So you can't determine integrity just by a picture of the building by itself. You have to look at the entire area, particularly for historic districts. If you did this and only made decisions like this, we'd have a lot less buildings designated as historic because of the integrity. As far as the vitrolite goes, I know a place in Greeley we can get a whole lot, but you can use substitute materials in restoration work. It's perfectly appropriate with the tax credits, and people are working on that. But here's another thought on this, what you're looking at, and I only know this because I was involved with those other buildings, not designing them. But when that project came in to the city, we were in a process of determining our historic district. We knew that the building to the right of this and one building 2 properties away were going to be removed for this project. This one wasn't going to be removed because the owner didn't sell out. So we knew we were going to lose 2 other original buildings that had modernized storefronts on them. We have pictures of them actually. And in fact, the survey forums have the pictures. However, in terms of setting and this new building, which we all agree isn't an architectural masterpiece, I provided comments to the designers, the owner, 1.5 pages of a whole bunch of changes for them to make to help it fit in better with Main Street and with this building. And if you look at what those suggestions were, they included the signboards that you can see above. They included changing the windows. They had awning windows originally. I had them put recessed storefronts into this new building. I basically told them to replicate everything that this little building had remaining. And they put that all in their design. Now, that doesn't mean that this apartment building is going to be contributing to the historic district, but in the context of how everything fits in, there is a story here as well that you have to look at.
And I think this is a good time to say that, buildings change, downtowns change. And so, as we move forward with this and we look at the other buildings in downtown, these buildings are going to go through changes, and we're not going to preserve and protect every single building as they were originally constructed in downtown Littleton. And so, you know, at some point, if these buildings are still standing in 50 years, you know, they're part of the story of downtown Littleton. And we might not love them right now, but people 25, 30 years from now might love them. And it shows the evolution of downtown Littleton. And so, you know, as much as we kind of look at them and cringe a little bit, they're still part of that story.
Yeah, I was just going to make exactly that point, that the evolution is the story.
Mm-hmm. And here's where significance is so important. This is the last building remaining. We need to develop a significant statement around this type of architecture. If you don't have it, then it will be very hard to argue why to save it if there's a proposal to move it.
You know, I believe that once we have the new code in place and we require a period of significance to be identified with the historic district, then there will be an opportunity to go back to that ordinance designating the historic district and add a period of significance, have text with it, and that would help to strengthen the district.
This building wasn't included in the original National Register district. It probably could have, but because the whole block had that block lost its integrity, so the whole block was removed from the district.
When I first started here, the board was adamant that this block was not eligible for ever considering to be included in a opt-in district or anything. And I have seen over the years how board members, and myself included, have become a little bit more sophisticated, thought about it a little bit more, and have really begun to ask the right questions about this now. And so it's been interesting to see all of this, and happy that we're taking a look at this building as something to talk about with significance and integrity. I have a little bit of history to add. Many of you may not know that the second story is one apartment up there, and there's been an occupant there for many decades. And I don't recall his name at this point. I met him years ago, and he's elderly now, but he's owned the building all this time. He was the district attorney in Routt County. And I asked him, well, how did you get there? That's a long commute. And he had his own plane, and he would get into his plane in Littleton and fly up there several days a week. And as far as I know, he's still there.
Wow.
That's cool.
So
I bet he has some good stories about the changes along Main Street.
Yes, I know he was asked about inclusion in the district early on, and he was, at that time at least, he was not in favor of it.
I'm glad you included this as an example to kind of talk about a little bit. Are there any other comments about this building in particular?
Well, it shows the complications similar to the example Chris showed in her presentation on the bank building downtown Denver with multiple periods of significance. And I just want to add, on that particular project, I was on a state historic preservation review board at the time when it came up for the tax credits. And the National Register in Washington did not feel that building was eligible for the National Register. And we in Colorado and the state made the argument back that, yes, it was eligible for all those periods of significance, for all the reasons that Chris mentioned, in order to allow the new developers to get their tax credits. And not only did they save the outside, but they also restored the lobby. If you've never been in there, very famous paintings in that lobby of that.
Murals.
The murals, yes, they saved all the murals and restored them. Wow. It's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous.
They were done by Alan Tupper True, who he was involved with a lot of WPA and CCC murals in the post office buildings and during the Depression, and he also did the the cowboy that you see on the license plate for the state of Wyoming.
And the murals in the Brown Palace. And
That's right.
An interesting thing about Alan True, he actually lived in Littleton for a period of time.
Really? Oh, how cool.
Many
I had no idea.
layers. Just like on Shrek, it's all about layers. All right.
Any more thoughts on this, on the Green Bride building? Okay, we move to the next one.
The View House.
Okay, well, my first thought is, some people might say, and people call me up and ask questions and thoughts, and sometimes they're a little bit maybe off the wall, sometimes they're very astute, everything in between. But I can see someone calling me up and saying, why would a garage be in a historic district? What could be the significance of that? And I wonder what the board members may have to say in response to that.
I think we need to hear from some other people because it's always me and Rick piping up. So please.
Well, that's because I know the answer, but everybody else has to talk.
Well, Amy has her
So
hand
Amy has her
up.
hand up. Let Amy
yeah.
say something.
Go, Amy.
Well, yeah, if the question, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. So yeah, if the question is why a garage half a block off of Santa Fe Drive is significant, I think that's why. It's right, a garage right off the main drag, north and south. I mean, that's part of it.
Yes, and before Santa Fe was a highway, Main Street was the highway.
Right, exactly. And that's one of how many garages in that one block area, right?
Exactly. It's actually part of a theme. Part of the early auto era that's a theme that is a historic theme across the state, but also is recognized as a theme here down in downtown Littleton.
Sure.
Yeah, I was just going to add the importance of the auto industry and how that plays into our history. Definitely represented by having a garage in the downtown.
Yeah. How many auto related buildings are in that 3-block area? I mean, if you start up by the railroad tracks and work your way down, I can think of 3
Rick,
offhand.
You should know this off the top of your head, Rick.
Yeah.
Well, there's the auto dealership that
exactly right by the tracks with the red,
the H building. I forget the name.
The Red Comet building, whatever.
Right.
Yeah, the original name was.
The gas station right next to it. There's another gas station removed before it. Yep. We have a gas station across the street from here, a gas station on the side.
Yep.
On Nevada, right behind this adjacent and to the east, there was another auto place, very early one. It's part of, it's where it's tied to the buildings on the corner there, the ones that have not had any work done on them for the last 100 years. If you go down Nevada, you can see the arched roof. I think there is a flower shop, or it's got an interesting facade, but you know what building it is.
I know the one. Yeah.
So that's tied to the street as well. Yeah. Fortunately, when we did the National Register nomination, this was a theme that was in a nomination. We already have it defined.
Yeah.
So under commerce.
There was also a garage doors, actually a livery in the Lilly building, which has long since been covered up.
Right.
Oh yeah.
I knew that. Yeah.
And I think Rick, I'm not sure if in your list of gas stations, if you mentioned the Summers Oil Station, which is now the Grand Station Restaurant.
Right. I mentioned that on the corner, right up in the corner.
Yeah.
Isn't that the concrete that's flame proof? And that was one of the big selling points about that, the modern things about that particular gas station.
Flame and explosion proof.
So So one other thought. So while we were looking at the Green Bride and talking about the evolution from the 1890s building to the mid-century facade, in my mind was the View House. And 30, 40 years down the road, will people look at the addition on the roof and say, oh, well, that's worth preserving too, because that talks about this sort of revitalization era.
That's so early
Over the last 15
2000s.
years.
That's what people did,
Exactly.
right? It's indicative of that time period.
Exactly.
Yeah. What can we say about expanding the period of significance over time? Maybe, Rick, that's a good one for you.
You can't predict what the future is going to be. We can only do the period of significance to what's remaining there, and future people will have to determine if they want to expand it. But we can't make it. If this addition was done by a master architect, nationally significant, then you could probably bring it into the district right now. But it wasn't done by a master architect. So, but it meets the Secretary of Interior standards in many ways because it's set back off the facade. The materials, if you look at the standards requirements, this building probably can meet it. I don't think they applied for the tax credits. I don't know. But we're only looking at the facade as well. But one important thing about this building is they retained the interior as well in this restoration, in this rehabilitation. They did not remove the roof. The roof is still there. The original bolt trusses are still in there. The original roof decking is still in there. They set this addition on top of the existing building is what they did.
Well, I was going to say, I think that shows you that this is reversible. So if, 20 years from now, somebody looks at this and they're like, hey, we want to restore it back to what it looks like here on the left, kind of thing, that is removable. It's reversible. Right. And that's a key component of, doing a tasteful rehabilitation, is that you have not impacted the original historic building so much that, you can't undo what you just did.
Yeah, so one of the pieces that I don't care for about the rehabilitation that was done is the fact that the new glass is so dark and is very different from, of course, before when the glass was clear. And we know why people want to do that. They want to keep the sun out. They want to keep the building cooler. Mm-hmm. But is this a problem for the building's integrity?
I mean, again, I think that's something that could be changed. B, they kept the original openings, which is a significant part of that. If they had altered the openings and then had darker windows, I think it would totally change the look of the facade. But because they retained the original openings, I guess I would feel that I could be a little more flexible with the replacement fabric, because, like the presentation said, these buildings need to be reused. I mean, if we preserve them exactly as they were originally, but nobody can use them because, their heating and, cooling costs are going to be so exorbitant that they can't afford to use the building, then it really doesn't serve any purpose to have, all these vacant buildings. And so, we have to have some kind of flexibility so that they can be used and enjoyed. I guess I don't have a problem with it because those openings were retained.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I would agree with what Chris is saying. I think for some things you have to be more pragmatic to allow for the adaptive reuse and kind of see the positives, like instead of retaining the original openings. I don't know exactly, I can't tell what the details are of the windows, but I assume that they maybe followed a similar light pattern, which would be nice. So I think you have to kind of give up a little bit of it being a pristine, exact model of what it looked like before in order to gain some good things. I would say, though, I don't love this addition. I think it's pretty jarring. And I think the worst part of it is the big black wall directly behind the parapet, because in my opinion, I would have said that parapet was the most defining feature of this building. And that black, whatever that is, it's like holding, I think it's related to the patio or something that should.
Yeah, I
it's
think it
the
supports the
patio.
patio.
So I'm not against rooftop additions generally, but I think that there are a number of design changes that could have improved this one. And its
I agree.
height just overwhelms the building.
What do people think about the fact that this building is on the edge of the historic district? And would anything have been different if the setting were different? If this were right at, say, Nevada and Main, the center of Main Street?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
The thing we have to keep in mind on the significance and integrity columns that Chris talked about is the different application between a standalone building and a building in a district. In a district, you have a lot more latitude because you're looking at a larger area. If this building were to be nominated for it by itself to be on a national register, it wouldn't make it now. It wouldn't qualify because of the changes that have happened. But in a district, you don't have to meet everything, all the levels of integrity. It's more important what the significance of the district is, and then how this building relates to the other buildings that are existing in the district. If all the other buildings, if all the other buildings around this building have been removed and are gone, maybe you can argue the district couldn't make it down here. But adjacent to this building are other buildings that are original to downtown Littleton. That's why there's only 2 buildings on Main Street individually listed on the National Register. Just 3, actually 3. But within the Main Street district that exists right now, there's only 2 buildings, and that's the Coors Building and the Town Hall Arts Center. None of the other buildings merited being determined individually eligible at the time the National Register nomination was written for the Main Street district in 1999.
I think the other thing I would mention too is, this is an adaptive reuse. So kind of going back to Andrea's question, like this is an adaptive reuse. It wasn't a restoration. So those windows didn't have to, be crafted identically to what was there originally. So there's that aspect of it too.
Any other thoughts? Okay, Chris.
Yes.
Those are the 2 buildings that you had, right?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, I just picked the 2.
Okay.
Actually, I should say Rick and we walked up and down Main Street and, kind of mulled over which would be the 2 good examples. So there you go.
I think they're great examples. All right, Kim.
So that's your presentation, Chris?
Yes, I'm all done.
Okay, that was extremely interesting and great examples and good conversation.
I guess my one question would be, do people feel like that was a good explanation of significance and integrity, and does that help us as we move forward with, district reassessment?
Any thoughts on that?
Who's in the next work group that will be looking at kind of the contributing and non-contributing?
That's
David?
Laura Gabriel and David Spratlin.
Okay.
Yeah, Laura's ill tonight. She couldn't be with us, but she does. We talked about the next phase, and it's David and Laura. So David, did you have any questions about that, or are you good?
I'm good. I think this presentation, along with the other supporting documentation, helps us tie it back to Littleton and give us some good references and examples of how to apply some of those reference documents to Littleton. So this is very helpful. Thank you very much, Chris.
You're welcome. Did Did the presentation go out in the materials? I'm going to be honest with you. We got this Friday. I worked Saturday. Sunday was Christmas present wrapping and running around, and so I haven't looked at any of it. But did that go out to everybody?
Yes.
So Laura can look at it, and if there's any questions, I can go through, or at least you've seen it. You guys then can go forward.
Yeah, and also you probably all know that these meetings are recorded and they're really quite easy to access on the city website in case you would like to revisit.
And I think, Andrea, don't you and David and Laura already have plans into January to actually start working on this?
Yes, we've made a little bit of connection, but we have yet to get our kickoff meeting going together. And now that we have significance and integrity kind of laid out, then the next thing is getting to contributing, non-contributing, and establishing a boundary. So I think that's going to be fascinating as this project starts to come together.
Yes.
That is work group 2's charge.
We need to look at significance as well. We don't have a significant statement that can justify the expanded boundary at the moment. There's a lot we can tear off from on the National Register District downtown, but it's stuck strictly to the commercial aspects, not residential, that we will run into on Alamo. So when you're looking at the expanded district, we're going to have to identify what are the significant themes we're going to need to expand on in order to justify bringing the whole thing into the district.
Yeah, we'll be taking a look at that. And I think that for those of us, including myself, who haven't necessarily written a statement of significance that includes a wider variety of historic resources, there are examples of that out there for other communities that we can get a feel from and draw upon and be inspired by.
Okay, I just want to say what we've seen here tonight, there was just so much work I know that went into this. And I know that you, Chris, and Rick have just surveyed so many buildings. And I just really appreciate and want to acknowledge the amazing work that you have done on this. And I think it's just wonderful. And we really appreciate it. And I hope this workload gets a little lighter for you guys. But I cannot thank you enough for this. Chris.
You're welcome. It was fun. It was interesting. It's a good way to kind of learn a bunch about Littleton in a short amount of time. I was just going to mention, Andrea, that I worked on the National Register nomination for the Greeley downtown, and Greeley had a good mix of like early commercial buildings, late 19th century, and then kind of that 1950s modernizing, like a la Green Bride building.
Yeah.
So we might want to look at getting a copy of the Greeley downtown.
Thank you for that. That's
looking at that statement of significance, more so than something like Fort Collins, which really has a focus on older buildings. I know Greeley really had that good mix.
okay.
So Chris, did it address that the 1950s remodel? Because this particular project's on the edge of the downtown. It's a big parking lot across the street from it. It's really on the edge, away, about 3 or 4 blocks away from the center of the downtown district, downtown area of Greeley, sort of on the southeast side.
There definitely was discussion about the modernization, because there were a number of buildings that had that, and there was this big discussion about if people wanted to rip it off and go back to the earlier, and it took a while to do that nomination. Walk up and down every street, and then they had that whole thing where they closed it off as a pedestrian thing for a while, and then they wanted to reopen the street back up to traffic, and so there were a lot of different layers to discuss, but it definitely addressed the 1950s.
I'll forward you the presentation that Andrea and David and I looked at, so you can see what was going on. This particular project's not in that area. It's really on the extreme edge, southeast edge of the downtown area that we had looked at online. So I'll forward it to you so you get an idea, because maybe we can pull from that nomination the significance for that street, the one building in Littleton on Main Street, and then maybe some other aspects of significance as well, because it's a bigger downtown.
Well, and we have access to Compass, right, Andrea? Because we're a CLG.
Compass?
Yeah, with OHP, whatever they're called now, at the SHPO.
The SHPO?
Their database. Don't we have? We should have access to Compass, right?
Yeah, we have access to the database. I didn't know the name.
So that was when we were still scanning nomination forms. I don't know what they're doing now, but so we should be able to access the National Register nomination for Greeley. And if not, then we can get it on the National Park Service site, but we could try Compass first.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay, are we ready to move on to the next agenda item? Item B, discussion on updating criteria for historic landmarks and historic districts and the SHPO HP model code. Are we ready to go there? Are we ready to go there? Okay, Andrea, do you want to take this section?
Do you see my screen here yet?
No, we haven't seen your share.
Okay, let me try again.
Yep, there we go.
That is the wrong one.
Oh.
We move it. Okay, can you see that now? Yes?
I see.
You need to go back to it. I see the tab, but you're on your Zoom tab right now.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Oops. All right, so this item is all about getting started on the update to the Historic Preservation Code, which will be a chapter in the Unified Land Use Code. As you know, the city is currently working on that project and is expected to go before City Council in October 2021. The staff was tasked with helping out with the HP code, and one thing led to the next, and we would like to have, as we've mentioned before, have HPB participate in this. And with that in mind, at the November meeting, HPB put together a list of comparison codes to take a look at. And that includes SHPO's model code that was put together in 2017, so fairly recently, for ideas to draw upon and get a feel for what other ideas are out there across the state. So tonight's presentation is going to focus on landmark designation, individual properties and districts. So the purpose of this is going to be to go through the items one by one and to have HPB develop recommendations to move forward on for the staff to put together into the draft. And I think that rather than going through the entire presentation, we have 4 policy questions that are lined up. And we'll just go through the first one first and then have discussion while it's fresh. And then when we're ready, we'll move on to the next one. Again, there are 4 topics of discussion. So they are landmark designation, historic districts, criteria for each of those, and then minimum age for landmark structures, and then support for historic district. In other words, do property owners consent to being in that, and how is that important to the process?
Andrea, may I interrupt you for a moment? Just in the interest of keeping, we really are trying to keep the meetings to 2 hours. I think the city likes that. And do you think this is something that we can get through in the next hour? Do you see that? Or is it possible to, if we don't, can we carry over?
We can definitely carry over if we don't. In my mind, the 4 topics being presented to you are not particularly complex.
Okay, great. Then let's roll.
I'm sensing that we'll get through it, but we don't have to.
Let's do it.
Okay. So we're starting off with landmark designation, individual landmarks. And one of the ideas that we have talked about before is the adoption of national registered criteria into the Littleton Code. And what we discovered with the comparison codes is that a lot of other places are doing this. It seems to be a good move, and for various reasons. For one thing, you're using the same criteria as the National Register. Why not? And then if you ever go for the National Register for a particular resource, you already have the criteria established. Another reason is the criteria is actually very well laid out and very thorough, at least in my mind. So the SHPO's model code uses this, and it's kind of a bit of a modified version. As you would imagine, you have to adjust it for a local jurisdiction. And then also Boise, Idaho and Fort Collins also use it. And once we talk about that, then we're going to talk about the addition of one more criterion. And this was suggested by board member Rick Cronenberger. So we'll get to that in a minute. So you may have seen in your packet, there's a side-by-side comparison of the existing City of Littleton Historic Preservation Code alongside of SHPO's recommendation. And what SHPO's recommendation offers first off the bat is that a property needs to have historic significance, and it needs to have the integrity to convey that historic significance. That's something our code hasn't had. And as I mentioned earlier tonight, the state would like us to have it in there. It's thorough in scope, the criteria overall. There are 13 types of historic significance, and an application for a designation, a property must meet at least one of those criteria for significance. Once you establish significance, for integrity, there are 7 different criteria, and a property is evaluated on all of those 7 criteria to capture an idea of whether or not the property meets it or not. And as Chris had mentioned before, not every single criteria needs to be met, but rather it's the feeling of whether or not the property can convey it through the use of looking at these 7 criteria. So,
can I ask a question, or do you want to wait for questions?
No, go ahead right now.
So where it says thorough in scope, addresses 13 types of historic significance. I guess my concern is using the term historic significance. What if a building is architecturally significant?
Yes, so well, let's kind of go through some of those. So for historic significance, it can be not only a site of a historic event, but it can convey elements of an architectural style, or be an example of the work of an architect or a builder who's recognized for expertise nationally, statewide, regionally, and locally. So I think that the significance can be, it's not necessary that it's necessarily a historic event. Another one on the list is a style of building that's particular to the city. Or how about this one? The building represents a built environment of a group of people in an era of history. That's a mouthful. But,
so the architectural significance, whether it's master architect or a good example of a style, is being wrapped under historic significance?
Yes, and here's a good example.
Okay.
So the Bemis House down on Bemis Street, you know, where Western Welcome Week's office is. That's a National Register property. And that building is not a masterpiece, but rather it's representative of a style that is common in this area. And it was shown to have the integrity to convey that significance of that common type of building that was built in this era. And that's how the criteria was met for that building.
Okay, I guess in my brain, I think of historic significance as being like education, commerce, ethnic history, you know, those kind of things. And then I think of architectural significance kind of being different, and that's kind of, you know, work of a master, you know, engineering significance, you know, excellent example of a certain period style type method of construction. So I guess I kind of have them as two separate things, whereas we're kind of wrapping them all under historic significance.
Well, then I have a question for you, because you have a lot of experience with this, Chris. So in the National Register criteria, you kind of have the two categories, at least as proposed by SHPO. And one is meet one of the following. And it seems to follow historic significance with all of these categories, 13 of them. And then the remainder of the criteria has the heading integrity. And so I'm wondering if are you saying that there's maybe a third category besides significance and integrity?
Andrea, I think it's the way you presented this, because the National Register has 5 categories of significance with subcategories under each significance. You've pulled them all out as just a total of 13 types of subcategories. For example, our significance criteria 3 is distinctive characteristics of a type or period of method of construction or an artisan. That's the heading category for that period of significance. Then it has six different subcategories under it. We need to probably approach it that way, basically saying we're going to have 4 different periods, types of significance, and then you have those subcategories underneath. And it's broken out that way in the model code.
Yes.
Right now it is, and the National Register criteria breaks it out this way as well.
Yes, but ultimately, if you are working through this criteria, you would look at, for example, geographic importance, and there are 2 subcategories within that. But to meet geographic importance, I'm not interpreting this document that the historic resource would need to meet both of those.
No, it's a matter of how you present it to the public. Most of the significance would be under National Register criteria number 3, which is architecture, or 1, which is an event. Those are going to be most of our periods of significance in Littleton.
Yeah, I guess my point is that whatever category you choose, and it might meet both or more than 2, rather, but a resource wouldn't necessarily have to meet all the subcategories under that heading.
No, it doesn't. You only need to meet 1 period of significance.
It's not a period of significance. You have to meet one of the significance criteria. So, yeah, period of significance is something different.
No, Chris, I know. Thank you.
Okay.
I know. I just you got to meet the criteria for the significance. A period is different. Yeah.
National Register has 4 criteria. You know, it's basically history, person, event. Person, architecture, and then archaeology. And then State Register kind of adds the geographic component to it.
Right.
Now, each of those criteria have multiple ways to use that specific criterion. So, you know, under architecture, you have work of a master, or, you know, represents a period method type of construction. It's a, you know, certain type of architecture. You know, so there are kind of like subsets. And I guess with integrity, I don't know that I would say there are criteria. It's more of their aspects of integrity, and it's going to be a kind of a combination of those 7 aspects But I guess when I hear criteria, I think like it has to meet a certain threshold, and I guess in some regards it does, but you know, with those 7 aspects, it's going to be varying levels depending. I mean, each property is going to be completely different.
Right.
Yeah, the model code calls it integrity criteria.
Huh, that's interesting.
That's what the model code called it out as.
Okay.
And so, Andrew, I think on your 13 types of historic significance, that probably should be broken down into the categories Chris mentioned with the subcategories underneath it. It'd be a little easier to understand.
So it'd be, I guess, like events would be kind of, you know, one thing, and then what a person, association with a significant person, and then architecture, and then archaeology, and then geographic, and then they have those subsets.
If you look at if you look at page 3 of the report, that's how it's written out. Yeah, you can see.
So my question is, which one am I looking at? Because when I look at the study session topics, there's like a SHPO CLG guide, then there's the SHPO HP model code.
Oh, so you can look at the SHPO model code itself, which is an attachment, but in the staff report itself on page 3, that's where the table is that compares Littleton's code with the SHPO section that we're talking about.
Yeah, and just to go back to what started this whole conversation, Andrew, I just wanted to say that if the model code calls it historic significance, I think that's absolutely fine for us to call it historic significance as well. I think it's clear that it has multiple levels within it, including architecture, history, geography, all of the things we've been talking about. So I'm perfectly comfortable using the terminology that the model code uses.
I think furthermore, all of the current Littleton criteria, you can cross-reference it to the model code, and it's all accounted for, and it just expands it even further, more clearly defines all those different criteria.
Okay. All right. Any more conversation on that topic? People feel that this is thorough and good idea to move towards requiring significance and integrity with each landmark designation.
Yes.
All right. So now here's the next criterion, and it says has undergone a significant historic remodel. And I think the advantage of adding something like this is specifically important, as we talked about during the last item tonight. It draws attention to the fact that a historic resource doesn't necessarily have to be important for the original way that it looked. It may have changed over time, and that piece in and of itself may be historic, and therefore can be landmarked based on the later remodel. In fact, maybe the original wasn't even landmarkable on its own, but it was actually the remodel that helped it to make it over the top to be eligible for landmark designation. So that's straying from the SHPO. What do people think? Add that in? I think the wording could potentially be tweaked a bit.
I have just a couple questions about that, about how, like thinking back to what we were talking about with periods of having a period of significance, how this would be different than saying it was architecturally significant for, like if we use the Greenbrier example, if you said it was architecturally significant during the period of 1930 to 1950, you wouldn't need the different criteria, not like opposed to having the extra criteria, just not sure if it's necessary.
Yeah, well, let's imagine that instead of being in a district, it was out somewhere else in the city. Then there would be no period of significance for that neighborhood that's been established. In fact, it needs to be an isolated historic structure. And so in that case, you would be taking a look at, hopefully you have all the information, photographs and whatnot of what it originally looked like, and then how it been remodeled in history. And this would be the piece that would help to focus on the fact that the remodel is significant. And as I said, I think that the SHPO's recommendation is you can get there too, but it's just because we have so many resources that have changed over time and are significant that I thought it might be interesting to include this as well. But
I
sure it's the board for direction.
I guess I'm not sure that individual landmarks can't have periods of significance. I'd be curious to hear what others think about that. And we're obviously not the only city that has buildings that have changed. So I'm curious why they wouldn't have included that in like a national register or state register or state model code to try to accommodate for that. But I'd like to hear what others think.
On the national register, it'd be very difficult to apply this. You'd have to meet all the other criteria, but we're looking at only local. This would only be applied to a local designation, not a state or a national register. But it just gives a little more option for us to look at a building that may have been remodeled that doesn't meet state or national register criteria. One way to look at this would be the 77 buildings on Littleton Boulevard that were surveyed. 42 of them were tier 1 and 2, national or state register. Now we've lost 2 of those, so there's only 40 left. The other 37 of them are split to tier 3 and tier 4. Tier 3 has about 25 buildings. Those are only going to be locally significant if ever. And many of those buildings have been remodeled. So this would fit into that remodel category. It has to be still tied to some period of significance. But one thing I would look at for those who participated in the planning session last Monday, but on Littleton Boulevard, are the houses that were remodeled from residences into commercial facilities very early in Littleton Boulevard's history. Within 10 years, the 1950s houses that were built on Littleton Boulevard were commercial properties. So here we have additions. And the landmark, the survey that was done on Littleton Boulevard identified these additions going on to these residential houses. So it just gives a little bit of an edge for us under significance for what happened on Littleton Boulevard.
Yeah, I get that. I think it would still represent a built environment and an era of history like some of the other ones that are already there. You could just make the case that the addition or the remodel fits under one of those existing ones, but or one of the other general ones. But
I think my concern here is also that if you look at if the remodel itself doesn't stand and follow the criteria, so the significance or the integrity, does this just give us an opportunity to circumvent that integrity component?
In most cases, it's a remodel. That's the important part, not the original building.
So then when would I guess I'm having a hard time understanding why the remodel wouldn't stand on its own then.
Yeah. I mean, there's no need to necessarily do this if we stick strictly to National Register criteria. One advantage to just staying with the national criteria that's been adopted down and down, as Andrea said, it resolves legal issues you could run into. And we're all about process and quasi-judicial. So the more you can stay in those boundaries of what has been defended in the courts in terms of preservation, the safer we are as well, right? And our current board has a lot of knowledge on preservation. The next one may not. So we're writing a code, not for everybody to use. And the next board may not have anybody experienced in preservation that could actually sort their way through these discussions. But you're right, David. We could make everything fit within the 6 criteria under architecture. The key is having historic context. Now, fortunately, we have one for Littleton Boulevard. So no historic context, it makes it very difficult, but when you have that historic context, it makes it a lot easier.
I guess the one thing I would say, and I think it kind of goes with what Lisa and David have said, is, we always need to start with significance. And so if we're looking at a building and what it's significant for is, it was built in 1930, but it was updated in 1960, and the 1960 component is what's important, that's going to stand on its own, and it's going to be eligible with a period of significance that focuses on the 1960 remodel. It's not going to deal with the earlier data construction. And so I don't know that the remodel component necessarily needs to be in there.
I think an example of that might be Jackass Hill Brewery, which is an older structure that was remodeled in the early 60s. Is that correct? Yeah.
Kim, that's not correct. It's a brand new building. I looked.
Really?
Yes, it was not remodeled.
Okay.
Rick, when they tore it apart, there were actually 2 windows right along the sidewalk of Main Street.
Yeah, that might have changed, but I looked at Tom and Lori's. I looked at that very specifically. There was a lumber yard on the corner of that property.
That's right.
And where the building is now was a parking lot. They tore down the other part of the building because it was reversed around. It's very interesting.
Okay.
I looked at it.
So we just busted a myth of Littleton that was actually a remodel of a.
Well, all the buildings downtown have been remodeled one way or another, right? So.
But that would have been an example that the remodel was infinitely more significant and important than the original structure.
Well, you go up the street to where the Marjorie, the black real estate building. I mean, the one right across from Vita. That's a good example of a building where it's originally the church, but the significance is the remodel that the Marlows did in 1960.
Yeah, that's a great example.
That's the example that we're talking about there.
Yeah. Okay, so we've spent almost 30 minutes on this one. Where do we want to go with it?
So you're asking to approve language, or?
Well, I'm looking for kind of a direction to staff. This is a study session, so there'd be no motion and no resolution or anything like that. But if you can give me a direction to go in, we'll go with that. If you wind up not being able to do that, then staff will come up with something. And there will still be another opportunity once the draft is complete to tackle it again.
So are the options on the table that we just go with the straight National Register criteria, or add to it?
Those are the two basic options.
Okay.
There.
That's the question. How do we feel about that?
I like the idea of using the National Register criteria. I think we've all kind of said, like, it's already established criteria. Other communities are using it. The SHPO's using it. We're all kind of on the same page when we're referring to it. I think the only question would be if we really need this historic remodel criterion in there. It's kind of the sense I got.
I would stay with the National Register criteria. I have a funny feeling these model codes are being written because of litigation that has occurred in the preservation field across the United States. I mean, you have to remember, this isn't all that old. I mean, the buildings are older than National Register criteria are. These things were written in the late 1970s. And there's been a lot of thought about how you keep using this. And what I've seen is narrowing down and getting the sideboards pretty tight so that decisions that preservation boards make are defensible. You take out the subjectiveness as much as you can, which is where people get in trouble.
Yeah, and I think to Lisa's point, we're not the only city that has structures that have been remodeled. We're not the only ones considering this. So, I guess in my opinion, the National Register takes this into consideration.
Do we want to vote on this, Andrea, or?
Well, I don't know about voting, but let's say we have 3 people kind of headed in one direction. If we have one more, then I think that's the direction we need, unless anyone wants to argue it.
I'll just say I agree with just going with what's in National Register and the Model Code.
Okay.
Agree
Yeah,
as well.
I'm on board too.
Okay, great. All
So am
right.
I.
Okay, so the next one is criteria for historic districts. And again, the SHPA Model Code uses the National Register criteria, and that focuses on historic patterns of development that give the area meaning. And we look at boundaries to be defined by visual changes, historical documentation. It also states that non-contributing properties can be included, just to clarify that. And let's see. One, I didn't include this bullet point, but another point is that this criteria really kind of nails it down that if you're going to have a historic district, the properties need to be contiguous. And that's important for Littleton because we have a historic district where that's not the case. And the state has been on our case about that. It doesn't really meet any sort of notion of a historic district. And so I think the National Register criteria is good and it's focused on patterns. It's in the Model Code, it's been tested, and it has that piece that's particularly important for us. So that's one piece of it, the National Register criteria. Now, in addition to that, Boulder also requires consistency with their comprehensive plan. We actually have that in our existing code, although it didn't wind up in the criteria section. So I would recommend that we include that because Littleton now is really lining up what we do in our codes with what we've approved in the Envision Littleton comprehensive plan. And then the other piece with that, what Boulder does, is they require that an application demonstrate community support. And that's all it says, community support. There's no specific definition of that. In my mind, historic districts can be contentious. They often are. And if the applicants take that extra effort to demonstrate that the community is really behind it, I feel that that makes it a stronger application and that extra effort to demonstrate that it would be worthwhile. I'm thinking that community support might come in the form of other people in the neighborhood, not necessarily in the boundary, would show their support for it. Perhaps, organizations like Historic Littleton, Inc., and perhaps, other organizations in the city and people who are active in the community. So we've got 3 things, let's see, on the table. We've got the National Register criteria, we've got consistency with the comp plan, and we've got community support.
I like the community support one. If it's broadly defined as the community.
Yeah.
And we are upgrading our comprehensive plan. We have the Envision statement, which talks about what our community wants. It's very clear what the community said they wanted. And right now, when we do a designation, we tie it to the comprehensive plan. So I think that's good to mention that as well in the ordinance.
I agree. I support all of these. I would be curious, maybe it's worth a call to the Boulder preservation planners and see if they've had any issues with not really having community and neighborhood support defined, and maybe what they've seen, like what might be helpful if we were to define that more specifically as what you said, that community and neighborhood support, such as business organizations, neighbors, give some examples to the code just to strengthen it a little, because it is a little bit big.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Right. Andrew, how do you see that this community support also ties with the percent of property owner consent that you have later on in your staff report? Seems like they kind of say the same thing, just differently.
Right. So the next, the later item that we'll get to specifically is directed towards property owners within the boundary. And what this is getting to more is the wider community. Is this important to the city as a whole to see these resources protected under the city's program?
I think that's an important clarification. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. That was a good point, David. It is two separate things.
All right. So it sounds like we're winning all three, unless somebody wants to dissent.
I'll just say my one thought on the comp plan. I feel that there's sometimes some difficulty when you try to include that comp plan and something that's really codified here in the ULUC that we're really trying to push this document to, and wondering how that, if it presents any difficulties for us going forward.
Well, here's how I think it might go. Let me go back to, I don't have it on the, I don't have it here on the PowerPoint, but on the first page of your staff communication, this topic tonight is tied to the comprehensive plan. And there are a couple of different bullet points there, specifically talking that have been evaluated and addressed by City Council and approved, that say that historic preservation in this community is important. And so it might not be directly tied, but what the comp plan is saying is it's important. And if there's a district being looked at, we can tie it to that general goal or policy. Is that clear?
That helps a little bit.
David, I think that brings up an interesting thought, though, and I don't know our comp plan well enough to know exactly like what the guidance is on the Littleton Boulevard, and if on Littleton Boulevard or somewhere else in the city, the comp plan says, this is an area for redevelopment, whether then that might bring up an issue if you were trying to do a historic district, that now the historic district and the comp plan are at odds.
Yeah, I think that's where I was just questioning. I haven't cross-referenced the two, and you're trying to bring some more of a steering document into a code document. I think it presents some challenges.
Well, this is where it's going to get fun, because the consultants that did the study said that we cannot have a historic district on Littleton Boulevard, because the properties need to be contiguous, and they're not, and they never will be. So Diane wrote that up when she made the recommendations on whether there should be a National Register district or not. We'd have to take some other approach for National Register if we wanted to, and it would be individual buildings listed on their own merit, not a district.
Yeah, so I would say now in our comprehensive plan, there is no goal for redevelopment on Littleton Boulevard specifically. And, there are goals for revitalization for citywide, and typically a comprehensive plan does have competing goals. And an analysis of the comprehensive plan, you might include both of those and write up a report to make a case for promoting one set of goals over another set of goals. That's kind of what we have now, and that is typical in land use applications, for example, for say a rezoning, going from say industrial to residential. You're going to find competing goals within the comprehensive plan for such a project like that. So I think at least you want some that are in support, and then it's up for the policymakers, city council, to tackle it through. Another thing I would say is down the road, there may be a specific corridor plan for Littleton Boulevard that comes along, and that would help clarify where the city wants to go with preservation and any revitalization that could occur and how that might occur.
Which is what we're talking about right now with the boulevard, the corridor study of the comprehensive, zoning, the new zoning code. And Littleton Boulevard's difficult because there's a lot of different zoning on the street that needs to be combined, and that has a big impact on the potential historic resources that we have on that street. So it's a real challenge for Littleton Boulevard because our most significant modern buildings are there. They're all right there, and they could all disappear very quickly, such as the two that just disappeared. One way to deal with the preservation of Littleton Boulevard to bring it to a higher status is you put in what's called a historic overlay zone. It's a zoning boundary with no criteria, but all it says is that this area has historic resources in it and that the city is going to be trying to protect those historic resources. It's up to the board then to define what those are and get them designated, but it'd be another layer that I've suggested for Littleton Boulevard is to create this historic overlay zone. There's a lot of planning tools we can use to help promote preservation if we're careful about how we do it.
Including conservation, a conservation district.
That's a little different, Andrea. That is defined. That's more codified than an overlay zone is. And I have criteria. I've sent Andrea criteria for a conservation district, which is something we could certainly use because that creates a preserved area with a lot less restrictions than a historic district would.
Yeah, and we'll have to talk about that another night. And
yeah.
Even with this project, we'll have the time to tackle that topic.
But right now, Littleton Boulevard is endangered, and from a land use standpoint. That's why I think it's really nice to tie it into the comprehensive plan, because the citizens made it very clear we want to preserve our historic resources. Now, they didn't say what those historic resources are, but anything that's determined historic is a historic resource, but you have to have the studies. And we're fortunate to have some studies in Littleton, but we need more studies of our buildings.
And if I could jump in really quick, it might be worth taking a look at the heritage, arts, recreation, and tourism section of the comprehensive plan, which might be more closely related to some of the goals and those goals and policies might be more closely related to some of the items you're talking about. Although, as Commissioner Cronenberger mentioned, the whole comprehensive plan delves a little bit into preservation and the importance of the historic Littleton.
Well, community identity is what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
It's our character, our community identity, which is much higher level than where we will be dealing with when we talk about specific buildings. So it contributes.
I think maybe just the wording of how we say it should, the criterion says that it complies with the comp plan. Maybe just needs to be kind of elegantly worded so that it's something that alludes to the fact that a comp plan is a complex document where things might not all, they might not all be in line. So just like the elegant way to say that instead of a very strict criteria, because my concern more is that people would oppose the historic district by saying it's not in compliance with the comprehensive plan by, pointing out something else. So I think just making it a little more clear that it's a complex analysis of how it's consistent with the comp plan.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, Michael, will the ULC be referencing the comp plan in great detail?
Well, the ULUC will be
underneath it, or?
Well, it'll be one piece that is an implementation piece of the comprehensive plan.
Right.
But yes, we will certainly, the criteria for approval for different things will definitely mention the, consistency with the comprehensive plan, or a way to measure a proposal against or with the comprehensive plan. So that'll definitely be in there.
Yeah, so Lisa makes a really good point, and it probably should be more stringent in the preservation side of our code, like she's suggesting, so it's understood.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we can work on some language on that. Okay, so let's see.
Are we good with this piece?
We are already at 8:22. We might not make it. Plus, I think we had a few little items at the end.
As far as moving forward with the project, Andrea, is it okay to continue this particular discussion at a later date in January?
I think we can do that, particularly because we got started a month earlier than originally projected.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you're comfortable with that, I do think that we should move on and end this piece here and pick it up in January, if everyone agrees to that and feels good about that, because we do have at least one other item that we have to just look at before we adjourn. And I'm thinking, I was told pretty clearly that we need to keep our meetings to about 2 hours. That I hope I'm not making that up. So if it's all right to stay till midnight.
I need to take a break for a little bit to do a little celebration now. We have friends coming over.
Okay.
So I can come back.
Okay. Well, yeah.
And you can continue discussing.
Okay.
All right. Well, so let's go ahead and break this piece here, Andrea, and pick it up in January. And if you want to send any other materials to us, that would be great as well. Okay, I know we have one other item that bears discussion, and that is legacy list, moving forward with legacy list and communication. Lisa, can I throw it to you and you can talk about where we are with legacy list?
Yeah, I was also going to say I'm fine with going over a little bit in time if Andrea wants to wrap up, because we're kind of on a roll with those, and I think there was only one left.
Two left.
There were 2 left?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't know what other people want to do, but I'd be fine going on longer, or I could just wait and talk about legacy stuff in January also.
Maybe.
Okay, what do we guys think? Do you want to continue discussing this tonight?
Mike,
Do you
is
think
there
we can get through it pretty quickly?
Okay, David's in. How about you, Amy?
Sorry, I had to unmute. If I could take a little break to grab dinner, because I walked in the door at 6:25, I would love to do that. So I might step away and then come back.
Okay, because I was going to say, is this like, how many courses is this dinner you're talking about?
I just want to grab it and bring it and,
Well, could we take can the meeting take a 5-minute pause?
Yes, let's do that. Let's take 5 minutes and come back and wrap for all of these questions for the evening. Okay.
Great.
right, thank you, Tyler. So Andrea, take it away. Take us to the finish line.
Okay, let's see. Oh, where did my, oh dear. Back to, okay, so we're on to the third policy item, and that is the minimum age for landmark structures. Currently in our code, the minimum age is 40 years. And when you look at our comparison codes, they go anything from no minimum age up to 50 years. And in fact, that's what SHPO's model code suggests, is that what you go with 50 years. So in Littleton, I'd like to point out, however, that we have, as we've talked about tonight, we have a lot of mid-century modern resources. And it is staff's opinion that 40 years have served us well, we've already had in the code, and that maybe we veer from SHPO's model code. Oh, okay. Looks like Chris has something to say.
I just want to say, I don't even think we should look at 50 years. Like, I think 40 should be minimum. And I want to say, like in Denver, we're serving everything 30 years of age or older. I think 40, absolutely. I would even consider going a little lower than that, like 30 or 35, but stay away from 50.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, yeah, and you know, I think as far as designating individual properties, the criteria we use using the National Register is really pretty thorough, and so I don't think we need to have too much concern that we would have these, you know, more contemporary properties that will get on the landmark list, because they'll be vetted through that way, through that criteria.
Well, and I think this is where local landmarks, local communities, their criteria should differ from the National Register. The National Register is a higher level, and you should meet a certain threshold, and things should be a little bit looser and a lot easier for people to get through the process. And I think, you know, having a 40-year standard is much better than a 50-year for a local landmark program.
Okay. And if, Chris, if you think that we should go lower, make the suggestion, and let's see if the board wants to go with it.
I just, you know, I feel like we end up, you know, losing stuff, especially like when it's right on that cusp of, you know, meeting that standard. I don't know. A lot of people shy away from 30 years because, you know, we can remember when that stuff was built, and it's hard to think of it as historic. But the 30-year mark is when we start losing a lot of buildings.
Right.
So, you know, that's kind of the point where people are like, oh, this isn't historic, we can tear it down. And then, you know, shortly after that, we're like, oh, wow, remember the such and such. Oh, it's not there anymore. So,
well, yeah, supposing it wasn't for architecture that the property was important, but perhaps there was some important national or local person who had grown up in a particular house.
Or an event. I mean, there's certain things that happen in communities, and you know that's a watershed event, or, you know, it's key to the community. You don't need 50 years to recognize that fact.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the age just a little bit. I think I agree 50 years is, you would lose so many resources, and that's just old. I mean, that's too many years. And I've felt that Littleton's very fortunate to have a 40-year criteria, because you tend to catch some structures that might have fallen off the radar screen and been demolished, you know, in that next decade. One of the things, though, to think about, if you want to go to a 30-year or 35, is just community perception. And it might be kind of a hard sell. I look at my own house, and, you know, it's nearly 30 years old, and this is not a historic resource. And I think that, just as far as, community perception goes, it might be a difficult sell. So, I'd be inclined to definitely stay with 40.
Yeah, I totally agree with that reasoning. I think Littleton is fortunate to already have kind of precedent of it being 40 years. So we can kind of hang our hat on, well, we've already had it as 40 years. Other cities would have to make the argument to get it down to 40. So I'm totally comfortable with keeping it at 40. I know a couple of the examples that you showed have that exception or the exceptional significance.
Yes.
So we wanted to add something like that for something that's younger than 40 years. I would be okay with having that.
Yeah.
But I think, like Kim said, keeping it at 40 just to kind of keep it as is in the public perception factor. It's why I would support that.
Now,
And I'm okay with that. I wasn't necessarily like saying we should rush out and change that, but Denver's is 30 years or older. I wanted to double check that, and that's why we're surveying stuff that's 30 years of age or older. But there are people who are very leery of, because then you start, grabbing more and more stuff that, might have been able to be demolished or altered significantly without any kind of review.
Chris, what I'm aware of in Denver is that Denver actually doesn't have, for the size of the city, doesn't really have a lot of individual historic landmarks, and that most of Denver's program is districts, ton of districts and properties in those districts. So I wonder how well vetted out that 30-year provision is, since Denver, it might not be a good example, in other words, because they don't have so many.
And they're one of the only ones I know that goes that recent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to say they have like 350, 400 kind of individual landmarks. A lot of stuff is picked up through local landmark districts.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think is important is that, and this should not be in the ordinance, but it should be on the to-do list, the city's to-do list and the Historic Preservation Board's to-do list. When a building is approaching 40 years old, that's when it needs to be on the radar screen. And, you need to just be aware of that property and maybe, some kind of communications with owners whose buildings are coming up on 40 years old, to just keep them on the radar screen, make sure that they're aware that they, that landmarking is an option coming very quickly down the road, and that there may be significant benefits to doing so.
Okay then.
So any more discussion about that, or are we good with 40?
I'm good with 40. Just throwing it out for discussion.
Yeah, that I didn't realize that Denver had gone down to 30. That's
yeah.
Wow.
But they also have you have to meet 3 of 10 criteria. And to me, meeting 3 is really challenging, and a local landmark program should foster and encourage designation of resources. And to me, 3 out of 10 doesn't do that. To me, it makes it harder. So, you kind of have at one extreme, like, hey, you only have to be 30 years old to be eligible for local landmark, but then you've got to meet 3 of the 10 criteria. So it's kind of at odds with each other, I think, in some regards.
It's interesting, though.
It is.
Great. Well, I think Littleton's forward-looking in that regard, then, with 40 years. So,
yeah. Good. All right. So the next item is property owner consent, and then just to clarify, this is property owners that have property within the proposed boundary of the district. And so what do other communities require? Well, it's kind of all over the place, everything from none to 100%. Littleton's is a little bit different than what you see in other ordinances, in that the ordinance is set up that you try to get 50% consent, people to sign on. If you don't get that, then more criteria needs to be met. More of the already existing criteria, just like kind of what Chris was saying, you have to meet at least 3 instead of just the 1. And then the application can move forward. So different idea in Littleton here. But the way SHPO's ordinance works, which I think is kind of a new trend, is that instead of putting the onus on those people who are going to consent to the district, put it on those that oppose it. And I think that probably all of us, well, those of us that work in the planning department know this very well, that probably the others of you can imagine this as well, that when a project from the city, from the government comes along and they're asking you to consent to something, you might not participate so much. It's hard to get people to consent. And so to get up to some of these percentages, 50, 75, 100%, 100% was possible. So the SHPO's ordinance suggests that instead people who oppose it are the ones that write in, and their percentage is 25%. If you have more than 25% opposing, then the application doesn't move forward. And so the staff felt that this was a good approach to doing it and is making a recommendation to move forward with this type of regulation.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And I know we dealt with this in the National Register program. So when you require like a certain percentage of owners, are you saying that, so like if somebody owns more than one building, so downtown is a good example, somebody owns 5 buildings, do they get 5 votes or do they get 1 vote? And I think that needs to be specified because people will find a way around that and say, well, I own 5 buildings, I get to vote 5 times. And if I'm voting no, then that carries more weight. I
agree with you. And I felt it was too much for the agenda to include that one for this meeting, but okay. I do include that too. And my fear is that we're going to be dealing with that with the downtown historic district, because we're going to be using, of course, our existing ordinance, not the new one, when the application comes through. The way I think it is most often done is that if you are property and you own property within that boundary, regardless of whether you own 1 or 5, you get 1 vote because you are a property owner.
Yeah.
But we'll be bringing that to City Attorney's office to make sure that we're pretty solid on that. I mean, there's another issue too. What if you have 1 property but 3 owners?
Does each owner get a vote, or do they get 1 vote combined and they have to come to terms on their own?
Yeah. So we'll bring that back. Yeah, we'll bring that back. And after with the city attorney about, so we know we are with our current ordinance and any thoughts that that they have from a legal perspective on that type of a thing.
Okay, I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because we have situation in downtown right now where we have property owners that own multiple properties, and that's probably pretty common.
Oh yeah, Rick introduced me to the guy who owns the what used to be the gas station vacuum shop.
Oh yes, his name escapes me.
Cal Murrab.
Yeah,
Cal or Carl or something like that. And he owns like 5 or 6 buildings in downtown. So that, like, I was just starting to think about that. Like, okay, like if they're on board, yeah, that's great, but it can cause problems. And like you said, Andrea, having multiple owners of one building, like you might have a group of people that went in on a building together as investors, and there's that component too. So,
Andrea, I like to approach the SHPO and Aspen example. I think it's a good kind of middle ground, and also just to parrot what Rick has said on the other ones. If it's been put into the model code, I assume that they've tested the legality of it. So especially for this one, I think this is one you want to be really careful about. So I like this, using the model code approach.
Okay, I think I see nodding heads all around. All right.
Hopefully we've done enough public outreach and, worked with owners that, a lot of this won't be a huge issue, but, you're always going to have people who feel like this is tying their hands and we're infringing on property rights. And so, yeah, I think you're right, Lisa, like we need to be prepared legally. And if the SHPO's been through it and, or they, based it on other communities that have, we should be good.
Okay, great. So we got through all four, and now just next steps quickly. So staff will incorporate these recommendations into the draft, and then we're going to have more coming for you, more policy questions for the code coming through the first quarter of 2021. So be prepared for that. And that is then the end of this this agenda item.
Okay, what is outstanding on this? Didn't we have a couple of questions on the first two that there was going to be? Did we reach closure on each one of these?
I believe we did.
Is that everyone's thought that we reached closer? Okay, good. Well, great. This is awesome. Fantastic. You were right. You could get through this.
Okay.
And then, Andrea, if you don't have anything else specifically, I know Lisa's got some legacy list things that she wants to speak to. Do you want to do that tonight, Lisa?
Yeah, I think maybe an abbreviated version, maybe just show you guys the map and raise the question that maybe you can think about over the next month before we have our next meeting. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to show you, I just wanted to show you guys what the map looks like now that it has historic photos on it, because I'm so excited about it.
Ooh.
Yeah, so I've gotten all the pictures that all of us have taken, and then where there are historic photos, they'll show up too. So just show you like an example, Coleman building, and then you can see the.
Oh, I love it.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, it came out really cool. So you can just kind of compare.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. But the main question, so now, I mean, there's a little bit of cleanup that I have to do where like I put the photo in the wrong spot or things like that just to be fixed. That I'll be working on over the next couple of weeks. But the big question now is how we promote this and communicate it to the public. So I think that's what we'll talk about. We'll hopefully have some more time in January to talk about how we envision presenting this and kind of the communication strategy that we want to have with talking to property owners that are on this map, and just kind of what everybody thinks the approach we should take is. So that's kind of, this is the map, and this is what it would look like. And, Kim and I have talked about, not wanting to just send a postcard and be like, hey, guess what, you're on this thing. It might be scary to you, but instead trying to communicate that this is something that's intended to pay respect for properties that aren't technically landmarked or don't have any official designation, but are still special to the history of our city.
How many total are there?
It's a quiz question. I think there are about 100.
I'm just wondering if like a letter from the HPB kind of saying, we've, compiled this list, we've got historic and current photos, like hyping this up as like, this is really cool kind of thing. And so that they feel proud that they're included on this list, so that, that we could then kind of say, hey, we want to, this is going to be on the city's website, and we'd like to put something like, every week I get an email from Littleton, and it kind of highlights all the things going on, and it talks about the ULUC and, like the holiday things they've been doing on Main Street, and when they had the weekends on Main, like it would be neat to, insert it there so that people know this resource is there. But like you said, they don't need to feel blindsided by this, or, they're neighbor or their coworker says, "Hey, I saw your house on the Littleton, email or something," and they're like, "Wait, what? I had no idea that was happening."
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think context is going to matter a lot here with whatever communication goes out. I think it's important to establish the context of, hey, there's this amazing map. Like, did you know how significant Littleton is, or how many historic houses are in Littleton, or something contextual about the map itself and not necessarily the individual properties there. And then, hey, by the way, you're included in this, so take a look at the map. So it's not quite so, I don't know, scary or I don't know what the right word is, but freaky that somebody's paying attention to your house.
Well, and do we need to kind of point out the fact that this, like, they're not obligated to, like, people don't get to go in their house, or they don't, like, there's no obligation. They don't have to, this doesn't tie them to any restrictions. Like, people need to know that this is just kind of recognition only.
Yeah.
It's
like, did you ever wonder
that it's an important part of Littleton's story?
Yeah. Like, did you ever wonder about your house? Like, how cool it is? Here's a map of what your house used to look like.
And here's some history about your house.
And it's probably appropriate to kind of talk about the genesis of this project. The legacy list was intended to be a list of some historically significant properties in the city of Littleton. And what we are trying to do is we would like to instill that sense of pride, as you mentioned, Chris, and do it in a totally non-threatening way. The list does not carry any obligation. It does not carry any restrictions with it. You are not required to do anything to your property, or you're not prevented from doing anything with your property because you're on the legacy list. And that's, I think, really important. This has to be completely non-threatening. And I tried to put myself into the shoes of a person who might find out that, my house is on the website, are people going to start driving past my house all the time and looking at it? I don't like this. I'm scared. And, what are you doing? And the communication needs to be very, very sensitive to that, especially for the residential properties that might not be in the downtown where this has been discussed.
Maybe I would insert here that on the website or somewhere on the map that it indicates, like, these are privately owned properties. Please be respectful of that fact, and no trespassing. No,
that's a good idea.
They are not required to provide access. Like, maybe we need to kind of have that disclaimer somewhere on there so that people realize, like, when they're looking at this, somebody lives here, so you can't kind of be a creeper, or, be driving by all the time going, "Oh, I really like this house," kind of thing. That it's,
Yeah, it's not, the map to the stars home in Hollywood, it's not that. But I think it is, and I'll use the example when we were going around taking pictures, oh gosh, in 2019 sometime. And I had a conversation with a property owner who was very concerned that her house had been on the 2001 survey. And, she was just, at first her back was up. I'm very much up in arms. And then she talked actually with a city council person and found out what was going on and got all of the story. And she felt great. And she was not threatened. And she was happy about it. So it's just a question of just really careful communication. And because we are looking at a very small universe, we can be very sensitive to that communication and let them know, and maybe even follow up with a personal phone call or something like that. But let them know that if you have any questions, and you probably will, we're here to show you why this is a good thing, basically. So the key is to, that this is a source of pride, and it is not a source of fear and, kind of the gateway that the city's going to come in and make you do a bunch of stuff with your property.
Yeah, there's nothing regulatory about this.
Yeah.
Really
It's just
informational.
recognition only.
Yeah, and it's all in the way we handle it. And we're hoping that the legacy list expands over time. So this communication, the way we communicate it with people is going to teach us a lot about, what do property owners really want to know? What is the best way to communicate this? So, and obviously it will be done before it goes live. So, yeah, but all of those points, Chris, are absolutely right. This would be kind of the, a little bit scary.
Well, and I think too, if maybe HPB members are, so that it doesn't fall all on, Andrea to respond to all these inquiries, that, we live in the community. Like, we have to live in Littleton in order to be on the board. And so we live here too. We're citizens just like you are. Maybe, sorry. Maybe kind of, if they were able to talk to a commissioner rather than staff. And I know that happens a lot of time, like when I was on the Aurora HPC, when, commission members approach people versus somebody from the city approaching them, there's like a completely different mindset. And so it might be that, our names and our emails go on the letter out to homeowners, so that if they have a question, then they can, they could just email one of us directly. And that kind of takes, that pressure off of Andrea and the city.
I think that's a great idea.
Along those lines, I was also thinking we could either have like a separate meeting like this where people could come and ask questions, show them how the map works, or we could just put that in one of our board meetings as an item, and people can submit comment or whatever about or ask questions about the map.
I like that idea a lot.
Just have like a kind of introductory. I'm sure. I mean, some of these people will just throw away the postcard and not care at all. Some people will be like very up in arms. Some people will have just a lot of questions and then totally love it. There's a lot of reactions, I think, to it. And so we want to have a lot of opportunities for people to ask questions or in whatever way they're comfortable.
So Lisa, I have a question. Are you going to be adding to this list? Because there's a lot more resources that have been surveyed and identified as contributing to Littleton's heritage that aren't on here.
We used the 1997, 2001, and the Littleton Boulevard survey. So
there's a few historic districts that aren't on here that have been identified. Arapahoe Hills.
Yeah, I forget at what point we made that decision, but it was like individually eligible.
That's fine.
Yeah.
So I have one way to help people reduce their fear is tied to the comprehensive plan and our vision statement, and what the community said we wanted to do in our city was preserve our cultural heritage, and your property is contributing to that cultural heritage. Now, one thing to keep in mind as far as another way to promote this, Historic Littleton Inc., I'm working on the new website right now. It's going to be much bigger and expanded and making a whole lot more references to preservation and advocacy. And I'd like to link to some of the city websites as well, so people have a way to get back and forth. But perhaps having Historic Littleton Inc. be your promoter instead of even us or the city reduces it below the level of government. Our website will be done hopefully around March. I got a lot of work to do. Gail Keeley and I primarily doing most of it because we got to get all the historical stuff in there. But our website doesn't work, and when we get it done, it's going to be much more interactive, much more descriptive about what preservation benefits are beyond what the city can do. And I have to talk to Andrea yet because I want to tie it, link to a lot of the sites on the city website because they're hard to find. But I was hoping to link this to historic Littleton as well, so people can click on it and see what the historic buildings are in the city.
I
Our
think that's
churches as
a
well.
wonderful idea to have this linked, but I do think the responsibility for communicating this to property owners needs to remain with HPB.
I didn't say, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying not communicating to them. I'm saying promoting preservation in Littleton.
Yeah, that's great.
That's a different one. I mean, I've had to think a lot about the historic Littleton website, and where structure is purely advocacy. So part of the linkage would be that we're going to have a calendar and we're going to be able to reach a whole lot more people to come to our meetings. So we'll be able to inform more people what's going on in Littleton. And right now, a lot of people who look for preservation Littleton type in Littleton and they come up with our website, which is basically dead. So when it's more interactive, it'll be better.
I think that's a wonderful thing to do when the legacy list is rolled out. But I really, yes. I don't remember who suggested this, but to have HPB kind of own this and own some communication.
Oh, no, I'm not saying HLI owns it. HLI is a method to link to it.
Yeah, that's great.
No,
that's great.
That's all it would be. That, here is a resource, go to it.
Yeah, but right. That's, the communication has to be done first, and we've got to concentrate on what we're going to actually say to these property owners. And
I know.
And
I have to save a spot on the website for it when we add it in the future.
Okay, that's good.
I mean, so I never believed a website was so hard to design.
So, for
Lisa, it looks fabulous.
Oh, thank you. You guys all contributed to it, so I appreciate it.
I'm so excited.
Really cool.
This is wonderful.
Yeah, I love how it looks with the historic photos. Mm. In terms of next steps, Kim, maybe I was really liking what you were saying about I'll have to go back in the recording and see what you said, but I loved how you were communicating how to talk about it. So I was thinking maybe you and I could connect and maybe come up with high level points, and then maybe it can be an agenda item on the January meeting to just talk through kind of what we really want to do.
That sounds wonderful. I'd love to help with that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
I will stop sharing my screen. Thanks everybody for going a few more minutes longer to talk about that.
All right.
Oh, and Kim, I have just a few brief items from staff.
Oh, certainly.
Okay. The first thing is that the January meeting is scheduled for January the 27th. That is a Wednesday, and that is later in the month than we usually meet. But for a couple of reasons, we needed to move it to that date. And so I'll get an email out to you. And also, if you're ever not sure when there's going to be an HPB meeting, the calendar on the website is always kept up to date. So that's always something that you can check as well. And then the other thing is that at that meeting, there's going to be a public hearing. There will be a certificate of historic appropriateness moving forward to that meeting, in addition to all the other business that we have with these study sessions. Okay, and then, go on.
So it's not on the 18th, it's a full 10 days later.
That's right. So the 18th is actually a holiday, and usually we move it 2 days to the Wednesday, but that didn't work out this year. So it's going to be the 27th.
Okay.
All right. And then I think I have some news that everyone's going to like, and that is that the schedule for the Downtown Historic District has been modified. And now the Historic District application will reach City Council during the time that the current City Council is seated. I think there was a lot of concern that we're going to go through many months or over a year, working through this, and then the election would occur, and there will be new council members on board who weren't abreast of everything that was happening. So the schedule is now shortened up so that can happen. And that's all I have.
Well, that is good news, and that's a lot of work ahead of us to meet that schedule. But that I think is very good news.
Yep.
So, is there anything else that anybody wants to add before we adjourn for the evening?
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what I'm
Merry
adding.
Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone. And I'm
That's
sorry,
right.
but we're not having a little get together this year. Maybe we'll have a summer party instead of.
Maybe
Christmas in
we can all
July.
meet personally. That would be kind of nice. Some of us haven't even met yet.
I
Oh
know.
gosh, I know.
It'll be
But-
57 degrees on Christmas Day, so it'll be a nice day.
Yeah, that's good. That's very positive. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tonight. And stay tuned and we'll see you all in January. So
Bye.
thanks.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.